Imagine this. A close friend tells you he has a new job. Not at Boeing, not at Lockheed, not even at Area 51, somewhere else. A place so secret, it officially doesn't exist. You laugh. Then he tells you something even stranger. He's not building experimental aircraft. He's trying to understand one that, according to him, wasn't built by humans. You're certain he's joking, until a few nights later, he drives you into the Nevada desert. You stand in complete silence. For several minutes, nothing happens. Then, a light appears, far beyond the mountains. It rises, stops, changes direction, accelerates. And the man standing next to you doesn't look surprised. He expected it, because according to him, he knew exactly when the test would happen. If you had been standing there that night, what would you have believed? That you had just witnessed alien technology, or a classified military project, or perhaps something else entirely? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Seeing something extraordinary doesn't automatically explain what you've seen. And that single idea is what this investigation is really about. For more than 35 years, Bob Lazar has remained one of the most controversial figures in modern history. To some, he's the first person who revealed the government's greatest secret. To others, he's one of the most convincing storytellers ever to emerge from the UFO world. Both sides are remarkably confident, but confidence isn't evidence. So I decided to approach this differently, not by asking whether Bob Lazar was telling the truth, and not by trying to prove that he wasn't. Instead, I wanted to know something much simpler. What can we independently verify? One claim at a time, one piece of evidence at a time. Because extraordinary stories don't become true simply because they've been repeated for decades. And they don't become false simply because they sound impossible. In the end, there is only one question that matters. What does the evidence actually say? For most people, Bob Lazar's story begins in 1989. A man appears on television. He talks about flying saucers, a secret facility, alien technology, and almost immediately people make up their minds. Some believe him, some don't. But if we're trying to understand whether his story is true, 1989 is actually the wrong place to start, because long before anyone had heard the name Bob Lazar, he had already left a trail. One of the earliest independent records I could find wasn't classified. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried in a government archive. It was sitting in a local newspaper, published in 1982. The headline wasn't about Area 51. It wasn't about aliens. It was about a man who had installed a jet engine into a Honda. And that man was Bob Lazar. The car looks completely absurd, half sports car, half aircraft. Exactly the kind of project that makes you stop and ask, who would even think of doing this? According to the article, the answer was Bob Lazar, a man fascinated by engineering, by speed, by solving technical problems simply because they interested him. Whether you believe his later claims or not, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't someone pretending to be interested in technology. He genuinely was. One sentence in that article caught my attention. It described Lazar as a physicist at the Los Alamos Meson Physics Facility. If that's true, it's a significant detail, because it places him inside one of America's best-known scientific environments, 7 years before anyone had ever heard him mention Area 51. For a moment, it feels like an important breakthrough. Maybe the critics were wrong. Maybe Bob Lazar really was exactly who he claimed to be. But a newspaper article tells us what was reported, not necessarily what can be independently confirmed. Descriptions are sometimes taken directly from the person being interviewed. So before treating that sentence as proof, I wanted to answer a more specific question. Did Bob Lazar really work at Los Alamos? One of the first things I found was a telephone directory. Nothing dramatic, just page after page of names. The kind of document nobody expects to become famous, until one name stood out, Robert Lazar. There it was, printed alongside hundreds of other employees. If that's genuine, then one of the most common arguments against him suddenly becomes much harder to defend. But then I noticed something. Next to his name were two letters, KM. At first, they didn't mean anything to me, until I discovered what they most likely referred to, Kirk Meyer, a private contractor, not Los Alamos National Laboratory itself. That detail is very important. Imagine a company building a new aircraft. Some people designing it work directly for the manufacturer. Others arrive through outside contractors. They work in the same buildings, use the same telephones, attend the same meetings, but legally, they work for different employers. Suddenly, both sides of the Lazar debate begin to make more sense. When critics said Los Alamos has no employment record for him, they may have been technically correct. If Lazar worked through Kirk Meyer, his personnel file wouldn't necessarily be held by Los Alamos National Laboratory. At the same time, the telephone directory makes it difficult to argue that he simply invented the entire connection, because there he is, in a document that existed years before the internet. Then I went back to the newspaper article, the one about the jet-powered Honda. It described Lazar as a physicist at the Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility. At first glance, that sounds incredibly important. But here's the question. Where did that description come from? Did the journalist independently verify his position, or simply repeat the title that had been given? The truth is, we don't know. Journalists aren't writing employment records, they're writing stories. And stories sometimes simplify things. So that single sentence can't tell us exactly what Lazar's job was. He may have been a technically skilled contractor, someone working around advanced scientific equipment, someone comfortable in laboratories, someone capable of understanding complex engineering. That possibility would explain quite a lot. It would explain why his interviews sound convincing when he talks about engineering. And it would explain why genuine documents place him inside the Los Alamos environment. But it still wouldn't answer the biggest question. Being connected to Los Alamos is not the same thing as reverse engineering alien spacecraft. Those are two completely different claims. Yes, there is credible evidence that Bob Lazar was connected to Los Alamos. No, that evidence does not tell us exactly what he did there, and it certainly doesn't prove the story that made him famous. There was another reason that mattered. If Bob Lazar really possessed the scientific background he described, there should be evidence long before Los Alamos. University records, professors, classmates, degrees. I assumed that would be easy to verify. It wasn't. There's one question that follows Bob Lazar everywhere. Why was he chosen? According to Lazar, he wasn't hired as a mechanic or a security guard. He was hired because of his scientific background, because supposedly he had the knowledge to help understand technology unlike anything humanity had ever seen. If that's true, then the path leading to Los Alamos should begin much earlier, at university. Lazar has repeatedly said that he studied at two of the world's most prestigious institutions, Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Caltech. If that's accurate, there should be a trail. Universities leave records, graduation lists, yearbooks, research projects, photographs. Not just one document, but an entire network of people and archives. So naturally, that's where I looked next. The problem appeared almost immediately. Despite years of investigation by journalists and researchers, no independently verified evidence has emerged showing that Bob Lazar graduated from either MIT or Caltech. I didn't say he definitely never attended. I said something much more careful. His attendance has never been independently verified. Those two statements are not the same. Supporters of Lazar offer an explanation. They argue that his educational records were deliberately erased. After all, if the government really wanted to hide someone connected to an ultra-secret program, wouldn't removing university records make sense? It's an interesting idea, but it immediately raises another question. What exactly would have to disappear? Not just a transcript, every class photograph, every graduation program, every professor who remembered teaching him, every classmate, every laboratory partner, every administrative record, every independent trace. Could that happen? Perhaps, but that's an extraordinary claim in its own right. And like every extraordinary claim, it also requires evidence. So far, no independent evidence has shown that such an operation ever took place. Then the investigation took another unexpected turn, because while MIT and Caltech remained impossible to verify, another school did not: Pierce College. Unlike the other universities, there is evidence placing Lazar there. That doesn't prove he never studied anywhere else, but it creates an uncomfortable contrast. The only part of his education that can be independently supported is the part that receives the least attention in his public story. Then I came across one detail that genuinely surprised me. In one interview, Lazar mentioned a professor named William Duxler.
Could you reveal some of your professors at MIT and Caltech?
Yeah, if you want. I don't have a list of them here. Dr. Duxler, I think, was one of them.
Researchers later pointed out that Duxler taught at Pierce College, not at MIT, not at Caltech. Now, it's entirely possible for someone to confuse where they knew a professor from. Memory isn't perfect, especially after decades. But once again, the evidence pointed back to the only institution that could actually be confirmed. By now, I noticed something that had happened several times already. The ordinary parts of his biography could often be verified. The extraordinary parts could not. If Bob Lazar's academic background cannot be independently established, then why did Los Alamos appear in his life at all? And more importantly, how did that path eventually lead to a place he called S4? There is one place that has become inseparable from Bob Lazar, not Area 51, S4. According to Lazar, this was where the real work happened, not on the famous base everyone talks about, hidden near Papoose Lake, built into the side of a mountain, invisible from above, and inside were 9 extraordinary craft. If that's true, it changes history. But before we ask whether alien spacecraft were hidden there, we need to answer a much simpler question. Can we establish that S4 ever existed? Because unlike Area 51, there are no official acknowledgements, no declassified maps, no confirmed photographs, no public construction records, nothing that clearly says this is S4. So, how do you investigate a place that officially doesn't exist? You start with the only thing you can verify: the geography. Papoose Lake is real. It's a dry lake bed, roughly 10 miles south of Groom Lake. It sits inside one of the most heavily restricted military regions in the United States. That much is beyond dispute. The location Lazar described actually exists, and that's important, because it means he wasn't inventing a fictional landscape. He was describing a real place. But then the trail begins to fade. Satellite imagery has been studied for years. Researchers have searched historical aerial photographs. Former employees have been interviewed, and yet, no independently verified evidence has ever confirmed the underground facility Lazar described. No confirmed hangars, no confirmed entrances, no confirmed engineering plans. Supporters immediately make a fair point. If the facility was secret, why would you expect to see it? It's a reasonable argument. After all, the entire purpose of a secret military installation is to avoid detection. The absence of visible structures doesn't prove there is nothing beneath the ground, but it doesn't prove the opposite either. And that's where discussions about S4 often go wrong. One side treats the lack of evidence as proof the story is false. The other treats secrecy itself as proof the story is true. Neither conclusion follows from the evidence. Then I noticed something else. People often treat Area 51 and S4 as though they are the same place. They aren't. Area 51 is no longer a mystery. Its existence is officially acknowledged. Its role in testing aircraft like the U-2 and A-12 is well documented. S4 is something entirely different. Everything we know about it comes from Bob Lazar. That doesn't automatically make it false, but it does mean we need to be very careful. Then we arrive at perhaps the most extraordinary claim of all. According to Lazar, there weren't one or two experimental vehicles inside the facility. There were 9 different craft, some damaged, some intact, each one supposedly built using technologies humanity didn't understand. It's an astonishing image, but I couldn't find anything independent that confirmed it. No photographs, no engineering documents, no inventory, no verified witness who said, "I saw the same craft." Everything about the 9 vehicles leads back to one person, Bob Lazar. If there's one argument that has kept Bob Lazar's story alive for more than 3 decades, it's this one, Element 115. Supporters often say he talked about it years before scientists discovered it. For many people, that's the end of the discussion. Case closed. But investigations rarely end with a single sentence. So I wanted to know exactly what Bob Lazar had actually claimed, not what people remembered, not what documentaries repeated. His own words. According to Lazar, the spacecraft weren't powered by conventional fuel. They used a stable form of element 115. He claimed this material produced enormous amounts of energy. More remarkably, he said it made gravity itself controllable. According to Lazar, that was the secret behind the craft's propulsion. Not rockets, not jet engines, gravity. But before asking whether it was true, I had to separate one claim into several smaller ones. Claim number 1. Could an element with atomic number 115 exist? Yes. Long before it was created in a laboratory, physicists already expected it to exist. The periodic table doesn't end because scientists haven't reached the next element yet. It predicts where new elements should eventually appear. So simply mentioning element 115 wasn't by itself a prediction. Claim number 2. Did Bob Lazar mention element 115 before it was synthesized? Yes, he did. That part is also true. But then we reach the third claim, the one that matters most. Was there a stable version of element 115 capable of powering an extraordinary machine? That's a very different question. In 2003, an international team of scientists successfully created element 115. Later, it received an official name, moscovium. At first glance, it looked like an astonishing confirmation of Lazar's story, until you look more closely. The moscovium created in laboratories was highly unstable. Its atoms survived only for fractions of a second before breaking apart. It couldn't be stored, it couldn't be transported, and it certainly couldn't power an engine, not the one Lazar described. Supporters quickly point out an important detail. They argue that scientists simply produced the wrong isotope. Technically, that's possible. Elements can exist in different isotopes. Some are stable, others are not. Nuclear physicists have even proposed the idea of an island of stability, a theoretical region where some super-heavy nuclei might survive much longer than expected. It's a real scientific hypothesis. But a hypothesis isn't evidence. After decades of experiments, no stable isotope of element 115 has ever been confirmed. And then I realized something. The debate about element 115 often asks the wrong question. People ask, did scientists discover element 115? Of course they did. The better question is this: did they discover the element 115 Bob Lazar described? Not merely an atom with 115 protons, but a stable material, a practical fuel, a substance capable of manipulating gravity. That's where the evidence stops. This chapter taught me something that applies far beyond Bob Lazar. Sometimes, a story becomes famous because one part of it turns out to be true, and over time, People begin assuming the rest must be true as well. But evidence doesn't work that way. Each claim has to survive on its own. Element 115 exists. That's supported. A stable isotope with the properties Lazar described is not. One part of Bob Lazar's story has always stood out to me. Long before Bob Lazar appeared on television, he began inviting friends into the Nevada desert, not randomly, on Wednesday nights. According to Lazar, that was when flight tests usually took place. He claimed he knew the schedule, so he decided to show other people. If that really happened, it raises an obvious question. How did he know when to be there? The first trip took place in March 1989. Among the people with him were Gene Huff, John Lear, and members of Lazar's family. They drove into the desert and stopped at a distant observation point overlooking the restricted military area. Then they waited. According to everyone present, they didn't wait long. A bright object appeared over the mountains. It rose, hovered, moved, then disappeared again. The following week they returned, again on a Wednesday, and again they reported seeing unusual lights. This time they even brought a video camera. The footage still exists. It's not spectacular. A small bright light, little detail, nothing that could identify what the object actually was. But that's not what makes the recording interesting. What matters is that Lazar appeared to know when something would happen. Then came the third trip, April 5th, 1989. This time things didn't go according to plan. Security personnel discovered the group. They were detained and questioned by the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office before being released. So, what exactly did the witnesses describe? Gene Huff said they observed an intensely bright, elliptical light. According to his description, it climbed above the mountains, hovered, grew brighter, then moved away smoothly before disappearing again. John Lear also described seeing unusual maneuvers through a telescope, and years later their accounts remained broadly consistent. Notice what they didn't claim. They didn't say they examined a spacecraft. They didn't say they recovered alien technology. They didn't even claim they knew what the object was. They simply described seeing something they couldn't explain. At this point, there are really only two facts we can establish with confidence. First, Bob Lazar took people into the Nevada desert on specific nights. Second, those nights coincided with unusual activity over one of the most secret military ranges in the United States. Everything beyond that becomes interpretation. If you only listen to Bob Lazar, the picture seems remarkably convincing. The details, the confidence, the consistency. After more than 3 decades, his story has barely changed. That's unusual. But if you ignore Bob Lazar for a moment and look only at the evidence that exists independently of him, the picture changes. Some parts remain. Los Alamos, Area 51, Papoose Lake, his technical interests. Those things can be verified. The claims that made him famous cannot. Not yet. Does that prove Bob Lazar invented the story? No, it doesn't. Does it prove he was telling the truth? No, it doesn't do that either. And that's probably the most honest conclusion this investigation can reach. History is full of stories that sounded impossible until the evidence appeared. It's also full of stories that sounded convincing but never survived careful examination. The difficult part is knowing which kind of story you're looking at. Perhaps one day, new documents will be released. Perhaps someone will come forward. Perhaps physical evidence will finally emerge. Or perhaps nothing will change. Until then, Bob Lazar remains in a very unusual position. Not confirmed, not disproven, simply unresolved.